It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM, and I am so happy to be able to catch up with Ron Swoboda. The book is called Here's the Catch. Here we are in the 50th anniversary of the Miracle Mets. It's the 50th anniversary year for a lot of things, Ron, but I don't know which was more unlikely, man landing on the moon or the Mets winning the World Series that year. Good morning.
Yeah, I'd put us in the less predictable category. God, that was an incredible time, though, when you think of what culturally was happening in America with the Vietnam War and that massive anti-war and all kinds of identity politics and, good economic times. So there was there was a lot of negative, but at the same time, we were the feel-good story that started developing towards the end of the year, and hardly anything anybody would really have predicted.
Yeah, and we being in the Pittsburgh area, of course, we're big Buccos fans, and it's interesting that I'm talking to you now about your book, Here's the Catch, because I was just reading last week about Bob Moose's no-hitter against you guys on that was a tremendous weekend in September when you're right there in the midst of the pennant race, and Moose throws a no-hitter against you.
Yeah, and I remember very well. It was good stuff, and he was one of those sinker slider guys that when he commanded his stuff, he could throw a lot of ground balls, and you'd go up there thinking you were going to put the hurt on one, and he'd get you out, and that's what he did.
Yeah. What a game that was. I remember reading about it. I think it was matched up against Gary Gentry, wasn't he?
I cannot remember who was on the other side, but you don't forget it when you're part of a no-hitter. And there were other games, too, in Pittsburgh. Remember, we beat them a doubleheader one day, and you tell me how often this happened. Our two starting pitchers drove in the only runs in 2 1-0 wins. Koosman went 9 and drove in a run. Don Cardwell went 5 innings and drove in a run. Cardwell, of course, the former Pirate. And we beat them a doubleheader, 1-0, 1-0, and none of the position players drove anything in.
That's incredible.
All we did was play defense.
Hey, tell me about, because I know how much you respected the great pitchers of your day. Tell me how fortunate you were that you were wearing a Mets uniform and you got to watch Seaver and Koosman and Gentry and all those guys.
Yeah, we were blessed with an organization that had collected these young arms, and Seaver was kind of a gift because we won him in a lottery pick because the Braves had screwed it up. He should have been signed by the Atlanta Braves, but they messed up the process, which is interesting. Or they, they would have been in a little better shape in 1969. Playing behind Seaver and Koosman especially, that kind of stuff. You're an outfielder. You're a defender. When they're pitching, the ball is just not coming into play as difficult as often. They're handling the offense for the most part, and the pressure comes off the defense. And because it's Seaver and Koosman, you look at their ERAs. Seaver, who came to the big leagues from day one as a Hall of Fame guy. Okay, yeah. His stuff, his attitude, his command was Hall of Fame from day one. There wasn't any break-in period for him. He just needed the time to collect all the statistics you need. He needed the volume of stats to eventually make the Hall of Fame. But when Seaver and Koosman were out there, if you got 3 runs or 4, wow, 4 was a laugher sometimes with those guys. And they were going to pitch 9 innings an awful lot of the time, and so they took all this heat off your bullpen. Look at the complete games Seaver and Koosman pitched in 1969. You don't, obviously the game has evolved and you don't see that anymore, but it took all the heat off our bullpen. When you needed your bullpen, they were rested.
Ron Swoboda is on the line with us. He was in right field, of course, for the Mets for many of those games in that 1969 year. And, of course, Here's the Catch is the name of the book, and that's because of that iconic catch that you made. And I want to get to the World Series in a couple of moments, but there's something else going on in 1969 with that baseball season. That's the first year you're split into divisions. And it's interesting, you mentioned Seaver could have ended up a Brave because is that not who you played in the playoffs?
That's who we played in the playoffs, and here's another little piece of irony for you. In spring training, the Braves were trying to trade Joe Torre, a legitimate power hitter, and infielder catcher, kind of a first baseman catcher, third baseman catcher. They wanted to trade him to the Mets, and they were talking hot and heavy because Torre was a New York guy, very popular there. They wanted to get into that young pitching we just alluded to, guys like Gentry, Nolan Ryan, Jim McAndrew. They wanted to capture some of that in the deal, and the Mets refused. And so the Braves end up trading Joe Torre to the Cardinals for Orlando Cepeda straight up. So they don't get the pitching they were looking for. We meet them in the National League, the first ever National League Championship Series, and sweep them 3 straight. And our left-handed platoon out-hits Henry Aaron, Orlando Cepeda, Rico Cardi, some pretty good hitters on that Braves team that our pitching got knocked around a little bit. We had to out-hit them to win that series 3-0.
That's amazing, amazing, and so there's that dynamic heading down the stretch. The Cubs are, they're supposedly going to be the story of the year, and they are. They have the can of corn, and there you go. They drop the can of corn, and here you go. Here come the Mets.
Well, and it didn't happen right away. After we had gotten Don Clendenin, big power hitting first baseman who platooned at first base with Ed Kranepool, and picked up our offense, just picked up our offense a notch or two behind that pitching that was really getting itself together as we moved into the second half. We were rolling, and we were playing as good as that franchise has ever played, putting together win streaks. And it occurred to me at one point there, I said, we're not gaining on the Cubs like we ought to because they're playing gonzo baseball in Chicago. And I just remember the thought occurred, Here we're going to emerge to some degree of respectability that's never happened to this Mets franchise, and end up as the pumpkin in somebody else's Cinderella story, for crying out loud. So into mid-August, we're 10 games behind the Cubs, and then we picked up a couple of games, and then that last week in August, I don't know if it was the Cubs playing all that day ball in Chicago, or the fact that they were a little more mature age-wise than us, or the fact that they did not platoon, that their guys played every day, but they hit the wall the last week in August, the first week in September. They hit the skids, and when they hit the skids, we were in high gear. We were winning 3 out of 4, and they couldn't win one over a 10-day, 2-week period, and they struggled, and we blew by them like a guy sitting on the side of the highway changing a flat, okay? I mean, we blew by them and never looked back.
Yeah, amazing. Our sports director here, Jack Benedict, grew up a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and he is a huge Gil Hodges fan. Tell me about playing for Gil. Talk about playing for Gil in 1969.
Hodges, I did for my book a lot of research with the. You can look up all the play-by-play sheets, and these were games that I was at, and games that mattered. But you look them up, and you look at, he platooned at 4 different spots, and you look at the decisions he made during games, in games, why he did them, when he did them, and you just see him hitting the mark as a manager. So often it's uncanny. I thought Hodges had one of the most acute and nuanced, baseball brains I was ever around, and I played for Gene Mock, who was reputed to be a genius. And Hodges when he did these moves, and he'd do some creative things, 4 outfielders, 5 infielders in certain situations. He did things that were creative, but you understood them. You understood the situation. They resolved themselves in a simple way so that some, blockhead like me would understand it. And, game one for the manager is don't fool your people. Don't confuse your players. And he never did. We were ready, all of us, because we platooned enough. We were all ready to play, and Hodges had a handle on it like nobody's business. And, between him being the player he was for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 50s, and being the manager he was in Major League Baseball, if he's not in the Hall of Fame come this next year from the Veterans Committee, something is seriously wrong with the process at the Hall of Fame, period.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. All right, we have a few minutes left with Ron Swoboda. You're in right field. You're playing the Orioles. It's the World Series. Brooks Robinson hits the shot. Take me inside that moment of when the crack of the bat came. What was going on with you?
Well, it was first and third. We're nursing a 1-run lead. Seaver is still in there in the top of the ninth. This is game 4. We're up 2-1. So if we lose this game, the series is even. And I don't think you want to let that Oriole team in 69 back into it. So I'm in right field. You play the outfield, as you work as hard as I did on line drives and ground balls, trying to make yourself a better outfielder. You want the ball. You want the ball hit to you. I don't think I want it hit the way Brooks hit it. He hit a line drive to my right, and I just made a beautiful jump. I worked at that. I got a good jump on it, and I'm 3-4 running strides when I realized that I think I'm going to have to lay out for this thing, and I'm doing it in slow-mo now as I recall it, but you're just in full dash mode, and you're in this white space where everything's kind of quiet. It's just you and that ball, it seems like. And that focus is, incredible. And I laid out on my backhand, not at all sure I was going to be long enough. In the book, I borrow a little Browning poetry about, if your reach doesn't exceed your grasp, then what is a heaven for, Yeah. Well, I got that thing in the web on a full layout backhand, and when it hit my web, I knew I caught it. And all I did was turn what could have been an extra base hit and a 2-run triple into a very elaborate sacrifice fly. Frank Robinson ties the game at third, but we stop them with 1 run. And Boog Powlett goes back to first base. And, we hold them there. We score in the bottom of the 10th inning and win the thing.
What do the Orioles say?
Go ahead.
What do the Orioles say after that? The Orioles players, did any of them talk to you and say, nice job?
Well, Brooks Robinson over the years was a good friend, and he once signed one of the Norman Rockwell paintings of him standing there signing autographs, but he went around and he bought the painting and made copies of it and did a promotion signing, and my dad went to get one, and he wrote on there to John, I made your son famous, Brooks Robinson. And of course, I always joked about it that every time I'm around Brooksy, I thank him for not hitting it right to me. Otherwise, I got nothing.
It's a routine.
Well, there was a sportscaster in Baltimore who said, the only way Swoboda could make a living with his glove was to cook it and eat it, which I thought was a pretty good line. My mother, who lived in Baltimore, did not.
Oh, Ron, it's been so much fun talking with you today. I wish we could go on for another hour or so, but I can't.
Nice of you to have me.
It's called Here's the Catch. He's Ron Swoboda. Hey, the best to you. It's so much fun, and I want to catch up with you again sometime in the future.
Well, you have my number, and thanks a lot for reaching out, man. This was fun.